Hello, everybody, and welcome to a second episode. We made it to episode 2 of the BOTC World Cup Weekly. I am your host, Dakota. I exist. Also with me is my lovely co-host, just as we were last week, which technically is as always. I have Jamsey.
Hello.
I have Alejo.
You do indeed.
And this week, we have a super special guest. The one, the goose, Navean.
Honks in chat. Honk.
And today, we are going to be doing exactly like we did last week. Honks in comments.
Honks in comments.
We have a bunch of games that happened in the Blood in the Clocktower World Cup. They were, by definition, games, and we're here to talk about them. Specifically, 3 matchups of 2 games each, starting with a Minion's Opinion versus Roundabout, which was played on the Jamie B0TC Twitch channel last Sunday, about like 2 hours after we recorded the podcast last Sunday. The Friday game on the CT Blood in the Clocktower channel, the Sibyl the Serpent versus Outed. I have a lot of opinions on that. I'm sure Navean does, and so does Alejo, because Alejo had to watch it. And just yesterday, at the time of recording, on the Off-Meta YouTube channel, Off-Meta Twitch channel, we had True Colors versus Math is Hard. A small programming update. We announced last week that on Wednesday of last week, Patter's TTV would be hosting All the Worlds of Sage versus Hide and Seek. Unfortunately, Patter's TTV had to postpone that stream. All of our thoughts were with Patter's TTV. So that stream will be replayed, that game, that matchup, this Sunday, later today, in about 12 hours, give or take, on the TPI Sunday stream. Why am I awake? Anyways, I will pass it off at this point to Jams, who will get us started on the very first matchup. Jamsy!
All right. So our first matchup this week was a Minion's Opinion versus Roundabout. We can start by just walking through that first script, a Minion's Opinion. This was run as a Legion game, and on Final 5, the good team ended up executing. There was a good player who voted on the Savant, who was being double claimed by a Legion, and because they were the only 2 Legion left, or only 2 good players left at the time, Legion got that victory on Final 5. So thinking about that game, right off the bat from setup, there are only 2 demons on that script. There is the Legion and the Little Monster. So no matter what, you have a storyteller who is going to be choosing those kills. And I'm especially excited that we have Navean here, because Navean was involved in storytelling both this game and the next game. And so they'll be able to give us their thoughts on what it was like to set up each of those games. From a spectator standpoint, it looked incredibly hard to set up that first script, a Minion's Opinion. There were quite a few interactions that seemed like they might be challenging, especially in a Legion game, between thinking about outsiders, both as bluffs and as actual in-play characters in Legion, and then thinking about some of the other character options that they had on that script. They ended up going with a Poppy Grower, a Noble, a Savant, and an Alchemist Ceranovis, which was a little bit tough because I think you're very limited in Alchemist options in particular with that script. And then everyone else obviously was Legion at the time. But yeah, it was a really interesting game. It seemed like, given the options that they had on the script, I thought that Jamie and Navean did a really good job narrowing down, what can we put into this game to go up against the Legion. And even though Evil did come out with the victory, I think the good team seemed to have most, if not all, of the tools that they needed to solve that game. The Poppy Grower actually had a great play where they managed to get one of the Legion to out Legion to them on, I think it was like the first or second day of the game. And so they were all able to identify that it was Legion, but what it came down to in the end was that one of the good players really trusted one of the Legion players, and so they ended up thinking it was okay to execute into the Savant double claim when it ended up ending the game. But yeah, I would actually love to ask Navean, since you are here with us, what was your experience like setting up that first game? What were some of the things that were going through your head when you were looking at those characters and trying to figure out, like, what can we put in? What's going to pose a challenge here? What might work really well?
Yeah, I definitely think I agree. There are some characters that are on the script that work kind of oddly with Legion. So I wouldn't say that the script is super like overly constrained. I've definitely seen scripts where Legion has really, really not fit, and you can get games out of this with Legion, but it is much more awkward. I get how it fits into the theming of this script, and I think that the minion choices are really excellent. And I see the theme of this shining through in the way that Legion can play into bluffing any of these minions being in play, and the way that you can use an alchemist even to put a minion ability in play, even if there are no minions. But it wasn't the easiest setup. But to be fair, that is true of Legion in almost every script that Legion is in. It just works awkwardly with quite a few characters in the Clocktower repertoire.
Yeah, totally understandable there. I'm really curious to sort of chat a bit more about the alchemist in particular, because I was looking through the characters, and I absolutely agree with your take that, we have a lot of really interesting minions that are very fun and very like spicy for Legion to bluff. At the same time, when we were actually, watching that game and when you and Jamie were setting up that game, one of the things I was thinking about is which of these which of these minions would actually be fun for a genuine alchemist to be in a Legion game, and that felt very, very tough because you look like Sarah Novus, I think, which was the one that y'all decided to put in, was really the only viable option, except for maybe a pit hag. But I also wonder if, if I'm an alchemist pit hag, maybe I'm gonna meta a little bit personally that it's Legion and not Little Monster, because if I'm a pit hag in a Legion game, it's gonna be very hard for me to literally pit hag the demon out of the game since there are so many demons.
Actually, I mean the same is true of Little Monster, right? Because the demon is just the player who is holding the token. So you would be able to maybe pit hag a minion's ability away and turn them into an outsider or a townsfolk, but you wouldn't be able to actually end the game as an alchemist pit hag on this script. I do think the other viable option here is Goblin, especially in a Legion game, because evil do not necessarily like if they get an alchemist goblin claim. Evil has every reason to simply believe it because they know it's Legion, and then they just keep their hands down, right? But there are limited options. I think that an alchemist poisoner in a Legion game is not going to have a good time. An alchemist godfather could potentially give away that it's a Legion game, depending on what you've done with outsiders there, and that's not a balanced choice. And I absolutely would never want to give an alchemist the boom dandy ability in a Legion game. That just feels real bad for them.
Yeah, absolutely agreed there. But yeah, also thinking about that alchemist goblin, it's on one hand useful for the evil team because they know, oh, this is definitely an alchemist goblin if we trust this claim and we know that they're not on our team, especially if there's no poppy grower. But absolutely miserable if you're that goblin and the Legion realize that you're that goblin because they just don't have to vote on it. And unless you literally get to a point in the game where Legion, can't tie the vote on it, like it's never going to go through.
It's true, yes. As an alchemist goblin in a Legion game, you're just never getting the win. Like it's an okay choice, but I would say the Serenovus or even the Pit Hag is still better. Pit Hag marginally. Serenovus is the pretty clear winner, I think, in a Legion game.
Definitely. It is, I will say, very fun because on many, many scripts, Alchemist Pit Hag is wildly unbalanced and very difficult to, incorporate into a game. And so I like that this is a script where an Alchemist Pit Hag can be, to some degree, a balanced option for the Alchemist. But at the same time, I do feel like the Alchemist's power in particular in the script comes more from, Legion's ability to bluff it and the fact that you can make a minion ability appear in a Legion game, but it does seem to have kind of limited options in that regard.
Absolutely agree on that.
Yeah. Um, we can open this up to everyone now. Looking at the script, are there any other interactions that y'all were thinking about, like things that work really well, things that were a little confusing, things that you would want to see changed if the script progresses? Like, what do we think about this combination of characters?
So, real quick, I don't have any like specific interactions, but I want to turn on the Legion real quick because something Adam said on the Off Meta stream. I actually don't know if it was caught on camera or not. But Legion is a very helpful tool in a lot of scripts as like a as the thought of it, right? Where like it's the scary thing in the corner. It's I can't trust people's claims because Legion's on the script. And I think it works really well on this script as a fear tactic. However, like you guys said, and I'm not going to retread your points, I don't know if it necessarily works on its own as a demon. I think I would like the script a lot more if it was a little monster only. I think a lot of the interactions are built for the little monster, which just reiterates the point that I think it was put on the Legion was put on the script to be a fear tactic more than a viable demon candidate.
So there's a couple of things that jump out to me real quick. And they are, first of all, one thing that I don't love, but I understand, um, is a balloonist in play or in a script with a character that can mess up just a single night of their info, namely the poisoner. I think it goes well with roles that can take it out of the game completely, like the Widow. Um, but I don't know. The balloonist's whole ability is pretty much nullified by a single poison, which isn't true for many non-first night characters. Um, but
Amnesiac
the
fits in that role for me, where I don't like
yeah,
it
yeah, that's
uh,
fair.
with drunkening and poisoning. Like I understand that you need drunkening and poisoning on almost every script, right? And
Right,
Amnesiac needs to be on some scripts because I think it's a good character, but I do think it does feel bad when you have a solve, but you got poisoned on one day, so you kind of just gotta shrug yourself, you know?
right. I think there's a few characters that the poisoner can be a little bit iffy with, not just on the script, but in general, and those two are among them. The other thing that's I think is something that I would change probably is to take off the lycanthrope on this script because it doesn't really play nicely with either of the demons. Lycanthrope in a Legion game is a recipe for disaster, and Lycanthrope in a Little Monster game takes away an entire huge part of the Little Monster's balancing mechanic. So I think the Lycanthrope is actually kind of helpful for the evil team on a script with the little monster and the Legion on it.
Hard agree about lycanthrope. It doesn't hugely fit on this script because if you're in a Legion game as a lycanthrope, one, the storyteller can and to some degree probably will mislead you that you are killing good players when in fact they are Legion, which probably isn't going to feel real great on the reveal. Or two, you're revealing that it's Legion like immediately, which is probably going to be quite rough on the evil team. Or three, you hit a good player and you just lose it for your team. That can feel extra bad. So Lycanthrope Legion, not the greatest combination. And, even if you are killing players in the night, you still can't be sure, is this actually Lil Monsta? Am I being a Legion detector? Or is the storyteller just deceiving me right now?
Yeah, I completely agree.
On the other hand, to look at the positives of this script, I actually quite like these two demons with the chef in particular, and also the noble to a slightly lesser extent. Just because I think that, I mean, obviously everyone loves to get a chef 7, um, but I don't know. I feel like a clockmaker might be a little bit more useful than a chef, but it's the same idea, right? Because the clockmaker and also the chef don't. I feel like they interact quite well with Lil Monster because they don't like give away too much info, and there's plays that the evil team can do to counteract them, but they still give away good info.
I think that a chef makes it more immediately obvious when it is, Legion versus Lil Monsta. Because in a world where you've got something like a Chef 7, you have three options, right? It's Legion, or it's not Legion and you're the drunk, or it's not Legion and you're the poisoner.
Right.
Or technically, I suppose, it is Legion, you're the drunk, and you got a wrong number, but still a number that indicates Legion because the storyteller feels like being nice. That's an outside option, though. So it does make it more immediately obvious to the chef player which type of game they're in, with, again, the small caveats that they might be drunk or poisoned. But a clockmaker is not going to be quite as I mean, it will be obvious when it's not Legion, right? If you get a clockmaker that's not a 1, you're definitely not in a Legion game from that sober, healthy clockmaker's perspective. If you get a 1, you could still be in either.
Right. So you could also complement that by tagging out one of the minions for a marionette, maybe, to increase the chances of getting a 1 in a little monster game. In terms of what I would trade out, this goes back to the discussion that we were having last week, where I don't love Goblin and Boom Dandy on the same script together. So I think if I were to look at this script and say, okay, here's what I would do, I would probably take away the lycanthrope. Not sure what would fit, but yeah. And I would trade the chef for a clockmaker and add in a marionette in place of the goblin or the boom dandy, depending on which one the author thought fit better.
If I were to make this script, if I were to make any suggestions, I would get rid of Legion. Personally, I just think this is a little monster only script. One still fits the theme. It still fits the idea of the whole minions opinion thing, and really going hard on the minions. I would agree. I would get rid of the boom dandy. I'd probably get rid of the boom dandy. But you can get rid of Goblin too. Goblins have become kind of a little bit overplayed at this point, so maybe get rid of the Goblin. Either or replace it with the Marionette. I replaced Lycanthrope with a more direct townsfolk ability, because right now with your townsfolk you have your Knight 1, you start knowings, the Chef, the Noble, and to an extent Pixie, and then you just kind of have roles that get information, but they're very like fast and loose. The General, the Balloonist, the Savant is kind of powerful, but you have the Fisherman, right? Like this fast and loose is the best way to describe it. So I would personally maybe add like an empath or a fortune teller or something else that kind of gets more information out into the game. But this has my favorite interaction, which is Poppy Grower Snitch, Little Monster. Love the interaction. Think is very good. Big fan.
So first of all, Goblins are never overplayed. Nope, not going to accept that. Love Goblin, favorite minion. All goblins are valid. Second of all, Serenovus Goblin is a beautiful combination. It is one of the funnest and funniest jinxes in the entire game that allows the Serenovus to make a player mad as the Goblin. I also think that Goblin is great here. If you do leave Legion on the script, Goblin is an excellent minion to have on here in order for Legion to have something quite loud to potentially bluff. They have other options as well, right? Pit Hag and Serenovus are also quite loud that they can bluff. But I just love Goblin. I am biased. I will admit to that freely. But Alejo, I would like to know why it is that you don't like Goblin and Boom Dandy together.
I mean, it kind of depends on what else is on the script to an extent, but I feel like if they both end up in play, which is something that is probably more likely to happen in a competition like this, then you get into a situation like we had in game 3 or 4 or whatever it ended up being of the last week's stream, where the good team can know who is evil but not be able to kill them. Like in game 4 of the first game, the first matchup, the good team were able to figure out exactly who everyone was, and I don't think it was a particularly fun experience for either set of players.
Before we move on to game 2, just quickly, I think it would be worth it to just hear from everyone. What do we think about this script and this game? Do we think this script is balanced right now? And if anyone wants to chime in on whether or not there was any sort of storyteller agency, and obviously in a script like this, when all the kills are being made by the storytellers, of course there's going to be an impact that the storytellers have on the game. But what did we think about that? Was this a balanced script? Was this a balanced game? And how did the storytelling impact that overall?
Both of the demons on the script, both Lil Monster and Legion, are extremely storyteller dependent. They are advanced demons, even though they sort of appear ostensibly to be very straightforward of, right, Legion, you just kill a Legion on most of the nights, and Little Monster, you just pick a player and kill them each night. That is a gross oversimplification of how much influence the storyteller has and how much pressure the storyteller feels by having to choose the kills, knowing that the kills that you pick are going to potentially have a massive influence on the game. I wouldn't recommend a script that has exclusively Little Monster Legion as the demons to anything except advanced storytellers who have been doing this for a while and sort of have a feel of the flow of the game. Because, even advanced storytellers can miss some things sometimes. We talked a little bit earlier about when the Savant was a double claim and we had killed the poppy grower in the night. And the reason that we did that was because there's a noble in a Legion game, which everybody had sort of figured out it was probably Legion. They were hard leaning Legion, almost all of them, including the good players. It felt like that was the right time because there were several good players who hard trusted each other, and if any of the two of them were alive in a final three, the evil team stood no chance. So we had to take one of them out, and then it ended up being we probably did it a night too early. If we had waited one more night, maybe it would have been a little bit of a different game. But at the same time, if we had waited one more night, then two of the players that were hard trusting of each other would have just had to have been in a final three, and good would have simply won the game, I think, from that point. So there's a lot of influence in storyteller choice in Lil Monster or Legion.
I definitely agree with that. I think on a script like this, you absolutely have to be an extremely experienced storyteller and be willing to really understand what your players are going for. Even sometimes to the extent of asking players in the night if they're on the Legion or Little Monster team, like finding out what they're bluffing if you didn't have a chance to figure that out during the day. Obviously, that sort of interaction is only possible in an online context.
I do think there's ways to do it in person if you're just a little creative.
That is also very, very true. I am not that creative yet, but yeah, it definitely matters quite a lot to really be considering what your evil team is trying to go for to make sure that you can make kills that support them, knowing that they're not responsible for their own kills in either demon on the script. But with that, let's move on to our second game from Sunday, which was the script Roundabout. This game was a Little Monster game, I believe.
It sure was. We went from one storyteller intensive demon to another. And I gotta say, I was hoping the randomizer would give us anything else because I don't like swapping out the demon type. I think whatever demon type it spits out is what I want to go with. I was really hoping it would be any of the other three, and nope, it was Lil Monster.
Oh, pain. I'm with you there too. I find that when I'm setting up a game in general, it's easiest to know, like, okay, what demon am I starting with? And then I can build from there to make something really fun and really balanced. But yeah, so this was a Little Monster game. We had a Widow, a Godfather, and a Serenovus in play. We also had a Lunatic Vortox who I think immediately picked like all evil people to kill in the night, which was very powerful. So we can talk a little bit about that in a bit. But yeah, this was actually seemed like a pretty solid game. It was a nice balanced setup. It looked like at the beginning there was a really cool amnesiac ability, Navean, that I believe you came up with. It seemed quite hard to figure out, but it was very strong. And what ended up happening in this game was that the amnesiac finally got to a point, I think on day 4 or so, where they solved the ability, and basically the one person who was confirmed to be evil to the amnesiac's point of view, knowing what their ability was, happened to be the widow who was holding the baby that day. And so that was the execution for that day. It did look like evil could have tied it, and because again it's a Little Monster game, they could have passed that token around to try and buy themselves more time, but for whatever reason the players on the evil team chose not to tie it, and so that ended up being the end of that game right there. But yeah, I thought this was a really interesting game in that regard. It seemed like even though, once that Amni ability was solved, that the that was sort of rough for evil, especially because if they had tied it, they would have been fully outed as the three minions in that game, or 2 minions and a demon, because I don't know if all of the players in the game at that time were on board with it being Little Monster. But yeah, it was really interesting to see how that went through. And Navean, once again, maybe do you want to walk us through setting up for that game, and how that went based on what your options were on that script?
Yeah, sure. So we did have a couple of limitations. So one thing is that Lil Monster is hard jinxed with Magician. So we had the randomizer gave us Lil Monster Magician, which means that we had to make our choice there. Are we keeping it Lil Monster and keeping a Magician in, or are we swapping Lil Monster, or are we keeping Lil Monster and swapping the Magician out for something else? So we chose to keep Lil Monster because, like I just said, I personally kind of have a philosophy of I'm going to keep whatever demon I get randomized, whether I want it or not. So we took out Magician. We had to do a couple of swaps, but we didn't really have to do a whole lot. They're like, this script kind of works pretty well. It is in terms of if you get a sort of randomized set, again, aside from the hard jinx there. Marionette is maybe questionable in a Lil Monster game, especially because the way that Lil Monster and Marionette kind of works together has been slightly updated, wherein if you give the token to the marionette, they do not learn themselves as a marionette. So you cannot hard confirm to a player, you are actually, in fact, the marionette in this game. Here, have the token, I'll prove it to you. Which probably makes marionette a little more interesting and viable in a Lil Monster game, but is just something of note. That is no longer an option for minions. So if you have a marionette with Lil Monster, the minions are going to feel a little bit more constrained unless they can really hard convince somebody, yes, you are definitely the marionette, but that's always slightly difficult to do, right? I would say, there's some good counters to a lot of the abilities that are in play, both on the good and evil team. I did really enjoy the amnesiac ability that we had, and like you said, once they solved it, it was incredibly powerful. And I think, so for the audience's benefit, in case they haven't seen it and are just listening to this overview, the amnesiac ability was each night choose a character. If that character is in play, you learn if they are sat next to an evil player. So we had a Chef 1 situation, and this amnesiac was just amazing hit. Every time they named a character, they named an in-play character, and they were able to sort of piece together the grim and where the evils were sat once they got that bingo. But it was a pretty decent thing to set up, I think. We chose to go with the 3 non-marionette minions for Lil Monster, because again, if you put a marionette in, it sort of feels like it constrains evil a little bit. I do think the one standout on this was our choice of to keep the lunatic in, because that lunatic caused some havoc for us.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the tough things about a script like this, where you have 3 demons that are going to make their own, or I guess 2 demons that are going to make their own kills, and then 2 that are going to be storyteller responsibility. On one hand, if you have a lunatic and that lunatic is targeting good players, as a storyteller, you can follow those kills and really make the lunatic think that they are, in fact, a lunatic and not, or a demon and not a lunatic. But yeah, when that lunatic immediately hits an evil player, and it's like, nope, for the sake of balancing this game and for the sake of this evil player, having a good experience, they're not expecting to die on night 2. That's not really fair to them. And so I think that you and Jamie made the correct choice in that situation to keep Hazel and then to keep Lynette alive. But at the same time, that meant that all of a sudden what was supposed to be an outsider who thought that they maybe had a marionette and wasn't sure who their minion was between a minion and a potential magician, which I loved as use of the magician on the script, to be able to give that lunatic say, this is your marionette, here are 2 minions.
I believe during the game I called her a lunatic with a scope. She hit an evil player on night 2 and then another evil player on night 3.
let's chat a little bit about some of the characters and some of the interactions on this script.
Apparently, this was the World Cup. This is the week in the World Cup where like all the amnesiacs got pretty strong abilities. Because on Saturday on the Off Meta stream, we had a really powerful amnesiac ability. On Friday, unfortunately, we didn't get to see it play out, but I thought that was a pretty powerful. Might not be the right word, but it was a pretty good amnesiac ability on Friday. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to type that in amnesiacs.
Good week for amnes.
Good week for amnes.
There's a couple of things again on the script. One character I don't think works particularly well. One character interaction I don't think works particularly well is Oracle and Marionette, because, and also to a lesser extent, Town Crier and Marionette, because I feel like, you've been in that position of being the Marionette who thinks that they're a good player, a chef or investigator in particular on this script, perhaps, who's just like, yeah, no, I'll die, I'm good, it's fine, and that can really end up screwing your team. I've been in that position with a minstrel, and it just completely sunk the game. And I feel like this has the same sort of potential to do that here. The Town Crier and the Oracle, in my opinion, also interact quite poorly with the Recluse, because the Recluse dying can mean that the Oracle is getting useless info, and the Recluse is just being told, "Hey, don't nominate the whole game, because you're just a liability to the Town Crier," which is just not a particularly fun way to play a game. On the other hand, the Recluse is also kind of necessary for several of the other characters on the script, like the empath, the investigator, the fortune teller. So there's a bit of a trade off there, in my opinion, with the Recluse and the Marionette and a couple of the townsfolk that are on the script.
I, for one, love the Recluse here.
Yeah, so I would agree with you, Alejo, on Recluse Town Crier. I think that while the Recluse is an outsider, right, and one of the things, because like the Recluse registers as a minion or a demon, and that is very well stated in Troll Brewing and Space Script, where a fortune teller picks you, you might be a minion or demon or an empath. But I like it in customs because you have all these really cool interactions. I do think Town Crier feels a little bit bad because you're forced to not nominate. However, I really like it with Recluse Oracle because I think Recluse Oracle makes people wary to vote or to nominate and kill people that may or may not be evil that are claiming Recluse, right? Because it just it does what an outsider is supposed to do. It sows mistrust. It's a hindrance to the good team. While I agree Town Crier is a little bit feels bad, I disagree about Oracle. I think Oracle Recluse is a really good interaction because it just makes you think about who you're killing.
I do agree a little bit on Town Crier, right? It never feels good to basically tell a player like you can't you would be hurting your team if you participate in this very basic way of playing the game. The agency that all players have, which is nominating and voting. I will say though, like for most of the game, if you're a Recluse, you can probably get somebody else to nominate for you. It's not quite as bad as, say, Recluse Flower Girl, which is really quite rough. And when you get to a certain point in the game where if you're a Recluse, you just have to be nominating because there's just a lack of good players and evil players aren't going to like volunteer to nominate an evil player for you. Maybe there's just a point where you say, well, we've given the Town Crier several days of good information with me not nominating, and now I just need to for my team. I think it's okay. It's not the greatest, obviously, but I also don't think it's the worst. But I like how destructive Recluse can be in custom scripts. Like it is an outsider, and it is a real outsider in certain custom scripts.
It is. I like it with some characters. The Recluse on this script gives the Vigor Mortis a lot of potential.
I was just smirking about that.
if the Vigor Mortis kills the Recluse, then potentially, then the Vigor Mortis has used an ability which is quote unquote supposed to be used on the minions. Like that's the point of the Recluse, right? But that's also poisoning. Not well. That's potentially also poisoning two characters. That's also potential. That's poisoning a neighbor of the Recluse and the Oracle, which really amps up the vigor. It also you also on the script have the potential of the interaction of Legion Balloonist Recluse, and I think that Balloonist Recluse is a bit of an unfortunate interaction at the best of times. But when that Recluse is potentially one of very few, that Balloonist is potentially one of only one or two townsfolk in the game, and they're getting completely useless info because the storyteller has to ping them off the Recluse.
Feels bad. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
But that said, the Recluse absolutely has some excellent, delicious interactions on this script with the seamstress, the cannibal, the Godfather, arguably, because obviously they don't have to register as as an outsider to the Godfather's ability. There's quite a lot on the script that can be really fun for the Recluse, but there's also a few things that I personally don't love. But I appreciate that you disagree on some of them.
Before we leave the Recluse behind, I would like to say, so last week on the first episode, we had some comments that we didn't necessarily tackle the storyteller's role in the World Cup setup, right? Because every storyteller gets 5 changes. And sometimes, and I think in most cases, you should probably use as many of those as possible. There's going to be setups where you don't need to use them, but the more you use them, the more curated a game can be to be good. But mainly in this setup, something that I wanted to bring up in this game in particular with the Recluse is I think the storyteller should be mindful of what they're when they have to make a decision in the game. I think they should be mindful about what that decision is going to do for both teams. And I think for the most cases, storytellers are, but specifically um, with Recluse and the Vigor Mortis, I think that's a really fun interaction, like you said, that the Vigor Mortis can basically poison can basically poison a good townsfolk by killing the Recluse. But you shouldn't do that every time because it can be really destructive. So, like with this game, when you have a storyteller interaction with the players, you need to be very careful on what you do because a good play from the storyteller could also be super destructive. I guess that's my main point.
Storyteller restraint.
Yes.
It's a good thing to have.
Thank you, Navean, for coming in and cleaning up my word salad.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, comes down to, as storytellers, it's our responsibility to make sure that the game is balanced and fair and fun for every player. And in part, inevitably, what that comes down to is sometimes there's a really fun thing that you want to do that you just like it doesn't make the most sense to do in the context of that game because it's not going to be fun. It might make things unsolvable. It might swing them too hard in one direction that's not going to be recoverable. And as storytellers, we're responsible for that balance.
I like the script. I think the script is good. There's a couple things like I agree with Alejo about Town Crier Recluse. I think Vigor Mortis it's an okay demon on this script. I like the other 3 on the script a little bit more, mainly Vortex Little Monster because I'm just not a fan of Legion. I'm just not. That's a personal bias though, so I understand. I think it's a good script. I think there's things you can do to add to it. I don't necessarily know what those are right at this moment, but I like it. I think it's fun.
I think Balloonist feels bad with Vortox as well. I think that's worth noting.
Oh, true.
Yeah, Balloonist is a really tough one. I understand why it's on here, mostly for the sake of outsider modification. And it's really tough because I think on there is a Godfather, but I think to sort of make up for that, and specifically when you have a Vig -1, it can be a tricky thing to work around with. But yeah, in general, I think Balloonist often on scripts, I see it work at best as outsider modification, and then the information is almost like, well, I'm just going to discard this because if I'm poisoned or if it's Vortox or if any number of interactions have happened, my info isn't really going to mean anything, which can be really tough. And when you're a townsfolk, you deserve to have an ability that helps your team and not just be half of a baron.
This is actually something that I have a bit of maybe a hot take. I'm not sure about. Not sure if it's a hot take on when it comes to script design, which is you don't need to put all of the outsider manipulation in. Look at the base 3 scripts. All of them have one character that manipulates the outsider count. The Godfather is enough for BMR. For S and V, you've got the Vigor -1. There's no way to add that back in. There's no character that can add an outsider back into S and V if the Vigor's in play.
I think that's a fair point, and maybe something that we should keep in mind a little more when we're making custom scripts, because there is a sort of, a philosophy about what scripts, quote unquote, need in order to be good, well-rounded scripts. And there's good reasons that, those sort of ideas are talked about when talking about script design in general, like, having sources of drunkenness and or poisoning, so that there's a little bit of misinformation and there's more room for evil to breathe, because they can push on information as being, even if this player is good, it's wrong because blah, 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 right? There's reasons to have outsider manipulation, but I do think that maybe when we're making custom scripts, we try to focus a little too hard on some of that instead of keeping it to a limited scope, because you're right, the base scripts only have one each, and if that's good enough for them, it should be good enough for our customs.
I think my final thoughts on the script are that my bigger problem isn't necessarily with the Recluse, although that is what took up more of the time. But I think the Marionette with the Oracle in particular, and also the Town Crier, is my least favorite interaction on here. But there's also a lot to love, to be absolutely clear.
I do agree with you on Marionette there. Like, sinking your own team without realizing that you're doing it because it's day one and nobody's told you yet feels real sad.
Yeah, I think I'd imagine at this point we've all probably had at least one experience like that, whether we've been a marionette or been in a game where the marionette does exactly that. And they're like, oh, I'm a perfectly fine kill. I had a game where I was a marionette tinker, and there was an oracle in play.
Oh boy.
Needless to say, it went terribly. Yeah, I solved the entire game for the good team, and then in the process was like, oh, fork. Like, it was very painful. But yeah, I do think the marionette, especially if you think about that interaction with the Vig, like if you kill your marionette and there's an oracle in play, not only have you just, set up a poison situation that makes it even more obvious because that poison it will be going through the demon or going, just to the other side. But if that's identified as a marionette, then it's like, oh, cool, who's the alive neighbor? We just kill both of the alive neighbors and we win the game. Like, that doesn't feel great.
Yeah, and there's a chef who can help with that too, right? If you get a chef 1 in a game, that can point you. It's not as strong as, say, a clockmaker here. So, like, I would actually recommend keeping chef in this one, not clockmaker. But a chef 1 could be a strong hint that, hey, maybe we've got a marionette in the game.
Yeah, actually, the demons with the Oracle actually do provide each other some excellent cover. Like the Vigor and the Vortox are an excellent pair with the Oracle. Legion and Evil's going to die. Like this is a game where you can have a Vortox and an Oracle, and the Oracle learn a 1 and think, oh, it's probably not a Vortox game.
You know what I do love, though, is marionette recluse interaction. You don't have to have your marionette next to the demon if you have a recluse in the game.
I agree with all of your points about how the marionette can feel bad sometimes, but with the recluse right there, not only does that cause like covers because you have the marionette next to the recluse, but whatever role you're pinging, you can just pivot to recluse. It might not work every time, but you could just pivot to recluse. That's why I'm showing up evil. I was actually a recluse. I was Sarah Novus locked. Sorry, guys. Doesn't work every time, but it does give a little bit of cover.
Yeah, I did actually. That was one of the first things that I wrote down after watching this game and after looking at the script was thinking about those demons. I think this particular combination of demons, with this particular combination of like game solvers and like townsfolk roles that are going to get information like when considering these four demons, this is a really, really fun combination. Looking at the roles that the townsfolk have to get information on the script, I think y'all are exactly right. That like it's going to take the town quite a while to actually establish which of the demons is in play. If you're a chef and you got a 5 on this script, like it could be Legion, it could also just be Vortox, and you would have no idea.
You could also just be the drunk.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think thinking about that, there's also like if it's Legion or Little Monster, there's that similar potential for double claims since I don't think there's a snitch on this. So neither of those Legion would get bluffs, but there's a lot of them trying to compete and figure out what they're going to claim, and Little Monster, they're never going to get bluffs. And so there's a lot to play with in that regard. And I think even with the VIG, again, if you use the VIG to kill a minion, then an Oracle is going to get a number that, would make sense in a Vortox game or in a Legion game, and even in a Little Monster game. And so I think there's really a lot to play with in that regard. And I like just how much flexibility a storyteller has in that regard on this script.
So I'll ask Jamie and Navean, the two people who have watched and was storytelling. Who do you think won this matchup?
I feel awkward answering because I story told them.
That's totally fair. I can start because I did watch both of them mostly live and then had to go back. But yeah, I think it is genuinely a really tough one because they're very different scripts. You have one script that is really designed to be full storyteller agency in terms of the kills, and it's all about centering the minions. And I honestly feel like the second script, Roundabout, was sort of the polar opposite in that sense, because Roundabout really isn't about the minions in any way. It's all about the demons and what the townsfolk have to do to actually establish what type of demon they're fighting. And so it feels very hard to compare those two scripts because they're accomplishing such different things as scripts. I think, at least for me personally, I think I'm probably leaning towards the second script, just because I think that the interactions on it, like for me as a player, seemed more interesting. I think Little Monster and Legion can be really fun to solve and to figure out if you're good. I don't know how much I like them personally as an evil player, and so I do want to acknowledge my own biases in that regard. But I think as far as the actual like balancing of the scripts went, it did seem like the first script, especially if it's a Legion game, and obviously Legion can always be hard to balance, but it did feel very limited in terms of what townsfolk you could realistically put in a Legion game to make that script balanced. I do think with substitutions, it could be a really, really fun and really strong script. But as they stand right now, I think for me, the second script is just a little bit more well-rounded.
Yeah, I think that both of these scripts have some pretty strong themes that sort of come through in the character choices, and they both are, like Jamie just said, they are accomplishing different things, and I think they both do that pretty well. Obviously tweaks can be made to both of them, but I think they both have strong potential. But I also lean a little bit more towards currently Roundabout being this sort of slightly more well-rounded script overall.
So, having not seen them play, and absolutely taking that into account, I think, looking at the scripts, I think that Roundabout for me is a better script. However, I actually think a Minion's Opinion has a little more potential. I think with a couple of changes, a Minion's Opinion could become a really good script, like the Lycanthrope toss it. But I think overall, like there's a really interesting core of a Minion's Opinion. Not to say that Roundabout doesn't have that, because I think they're both overall pretty good scripts. But just, yeah, I would give Roundabout the edge right now, but I'd like to see a Minion's Opinion played with a couple of changes.
I would love to see what happens with both of these scripts, regardless of which one comes through.
For sure.
I completely agree.
That's something that we should know. Just because you get knocked out doesn't mean you shouldn't keep working on your script. This is a competition, and not everyone can win a competition. But specifically with these two scripts, and also other scripts as a competition, if you think your script is worthwhile, keep editing it. Take all the feedback you get and make it better. Win or no win, your script deserves to be the best script it can be. Moving onwards, let's go to the Friday matchup, and I will head it over to Alejo, who was our correspondent at the Friday matchups.
Absolutely. So I'll keep it short. Well, the first thing that we had was a day one goblin, because of course we did.
I wonder why. I wonder why that was, y'all.
Guess who the goblin was?
We had two Dakota goblins, which was a thing that undoubtedly happened.
Are you saying my "You People" promo wasn't riveting and exciting?
Oh, the way that you sold that goblin on the first day, just like, why is everyone claiming goblin? I'll claim goblin. I'm the goblin. Okay, let's kill you. I win. Absolutely beautiful. What was the setup we had for that one? Yeah, we had the lunatic, who obviously was given you as a minion, Dakota. So I don't think they knew they'd lost the game until after the game ended. There were a few. The demon on the script was the Vortox, which led to a couple of funky things. Namely, so we'll start with the monk, which was in play. Vortox monk can be a really fun combination because obviously the person that the monk picks is immune from any Vortox information, which, if they hit an evil player, can be absolutely devastating to bluff because you should be getting good info, but that doesn't line up. Or you can sell that it's not a Vortox game. There were a couple of interactions with the Vortox and also with the Puka, which was the demon in the game 2 setup, that are a little bit less. I don't know how to say it, but I guess fun. There's a Raven Keeper on the script, and with 2 out of the 3 demons, that Raven Keeper is going to be getting less useful information. Overall, though, it was just a really quite hard. It was just a World Cup game, bit of a day one game over because why not? Also, the Amnesiac and the Night Watchman, because I think you were originally going to put the randomizer gave you a Night Watchman, but that just really doesn't work with Vortox unless you've got very, very specific edge cases. Like the Night Watchman picks the demon on the first night. You can show them as a lunatic, I suppose. It's just a little bit of a weird interaction there. So it's not the best. However, it did produce a couple of really quite fun games, and I hope that you overall agree with that.
I think you pretty much hit all the talking points about the first game. It was a day one goblin, so there we didn't get to see how the rest of that potential would play out. We did choose to take the Night Watchman out because, again, it is a bit of an odd interaction with Vortox. Whether that is interesting and good is probably, I think, just a matter of opinion, because certainly some people like the fact that it is a little bit awkward and therefore can sort of be used as a Vortox checker quite early in the game. But we thought that it would be really interesting to take the Night Watchman out and let that be one of the demon bluffs, because they, of course, know that it is a Vortox game, and see what they might try to do with that. But then we never got to see it because in swooped Dakota for the goblin.
You want to know a fun fact about this game before we move on to the second game? I did not know what my demon was or what my other minion was, because the only time I talked to my demon in that game was in a 3-for-3 with another human where all 3 of us lied to each other. And so I literally goblined by the skin of my teeth. I have opinions on the script, but I will wait till after the second game. because I don't know. Spoiler alert, I was a main character in these games, all three of them.
All right, the second game was also a bit of a wild one. Now I remember it. The Puka, which was the demon in that game, selected the Acrobat. So the Acrobat was going to die, except the Dreamer picked the Puka and just absolutely nailed the demon and called that on day one, which made it look like we were going to get another day one game, this time for the good team. But that didn't happen. Instead of that, the Snake Charmer snake charmed the Puka after the Poisoner made the sacrifice play. And then the Snake Charmer turned Puka goes ahead and picks the neighbor of the Acrobat, so the Acrobat died anyway. It did that. It did end the day after the Acrobat died because there was just a little bit too much, not enough options really for the evil team to escape, which I think points at a couple of the interactions on the script again. The Puka once again doesn't combine very well with the Raven Keeper, but it's also not great with the Sweetheart because the Sweetheart just doesn't have an ability at that point. I personally don't like it that much with the Monk, just because the Monk basically gets 2 bites of the apple. It's really quite strong. They can prevent the target from being poisoned, but they can also prevent them from dying. And finally, it's also a little bit weird with the Snake Charmer because there's no way, with the very, very unlikely exception of what ended up happening being the Acrobat dying because their neighbor was picked. There's no real way. There's no way on this script, at least, for the Puka to kill the Knight of the Snake Charming, which really backs up the Snake Charmer. Like, obviously, you can bluff around that, but that is, I think, a little bit of a wonky interaction.
Or you can get lucky and you could accidentally kill the Acrobat around that.
You absolutely could also accidentally kill the Acrobat around that. This is a note that I took before that happened, but I think it still holds true because you need an Acrobat to be in the game for that to work, and you need to randomly hit a neighbor of the Acrobat for that to work.
Oh yeah, it is such an edge case scenario, and somehow we ran into it.
Yeah, both of those did end up happening. Those were a couple of the bigger concerns that played out in the script. I don't know how this one felt to set up or to play in. How was it from your perspective, Navean?
I think that, like you said, there are a couple of different, like, sort of awkward things to put in play together. Maybe we should have, when the Puka came up, maybe we should have made a couple of more swaps with regards to Snake Charmer or Monk not being in that game, because you're right, they do kind of interact quite awkwardly with it. And, again, the Vortox Night Watchman situation. I do think this is a pretty decent script for Acrobat, but that relies on Puka remaining as one of the demons on the script. And I'm actually not sure whether I would prefer to see the Puka gone or whether I would prefer to see the Monk and Snake Charmer maybe swapped out for something else instead.
How about the Raven Keeper and the Sweetheart?
And yeah, the Raven Keeper and the Sweetheart also work quite poorly with the Puka. The Raven Keeper also works poorly with Vortox. So that definitely feels sad for them. Yeah, it's very bad with Sweetheart there, because if you kill the Sweetheart in the night, you're just like, you've made an objectively good kill for the evil team because it would poison somebody, drunk somebody, except it doesn't, which is sad. So yeah, I think Puka's probably the most awkward demon on here. Other than that, it's really not too bad. It was, pretty decent setups to be made out of this.
I think I have a biased opinion when it comes to that second game. I think looking back and rewatching it, because I have rewatched these streams, specifically the Friday one, I have not rewatched Off Meta, but I think that the setup was as good as you're going to get with the way the script is currently. I agree with all of Navean points and Alejo points that there is some interactions that are just broken. But I don't know. Like, the first game felt good because I got the Goblin win. It may have been interesting to see if it went longer than that, because I think the setup was interesting. And I think with a lunatic that did not talk to either of their minions, on day one, and you had someone who was Theranov's mad. You had a really good amnesiac ability. There's a lot of fun that could happen if I didn't uh, ruin everyone's fun by ending the game. Um, but I think that in that first game, it really goes to your players and who you're playing the game with really, really matters. Because if it wasn't for Bruce doing things that Bruce does, if you don't play with Bruce, Bruce likes to claim minions in the beginning of the game if they are like a recluse or another role like that. And if that wasn't for JR tunnel visioning on me getting doing my normal thing of kill all goblins, we wouldn't have got that goblin. It took both Bruce claiming Goblin the way he did and JR tunneling on me being indignant against Bruce to get to where we got. So it was such a weird ending to really judge the script on. The second game, however, as a evil player that really got screwed because of the snake charming and not knowing there was a snake charming, and then the former demon, not outing the minions. So I was in this weird like limbo stage. It was a weird experience. I think the setup was again decent. There was some broken mechanics because of the way the script's built, but it was just like we had two games of the script that if you roll the dice you could not predict that those things would happen.
Yeah, unfortunately, a night one dreaming of the demon is always a bit rough for evil. Like it sets them off on the back foot way harder than if literally anybody else had been dreamt. And then having a night two snake charm is always like, it's something you got to recover from, and good luck.
Like I do think that the script has some fundamental flaws in it. I think it's a decent like premise, but I do think the way that it's currently set up has some fundamental flaws that I would like to see changed out. But I also feel like that it wasn't given the fair shake it was due because of just luck and happenstance, pure chance.
Yeah, it was definitely luck that was the issue there, not like necessarily the fault of the script. Like we've already talked about the faults that we have seen in it, so there's no need to rehash that. But what happened in those particular games was largely just like some unfortunate luck for whichever team's perspective you're looking at. Well, I suppose technically game one wasn't really luck. Like that's the good team making a choice to put hands up on a goblin claim, but Game two's weird interactions was definitely just some unfortunate luck on night one.
Jamie, have you had a look at the script? Did you? I don't know if you caught the game.
Yeah, I've kind of skimmed through the recordings. I didn't get a chance to watch it live. But it is interesting to see. I mean, one of the first things that I noticed was, in that very first setup, I think there was a lunatic Fangu.
A Fangunatic, if you will.
Yes, that in itself is a reason to have those two things on a script together. But I do think that in particular, lunatic Fangu is really funny because but like also really powerful. Like I say it as a joke, but let's say you're the lunatic Fangu, you target an outsider. Obviously, you don't jump, but if the actual demon in that game is a Fangu, they jump. Oh, surprise! You're the outsider who knows who the demon is. Like that's really rough. Like not only do you know, like if you figure that out, which I think it's not the hardest interaction in the world to figure out, that feels incredibly strong for an outsider. And obviously, we talked a lot when chatting about the Sunday set of games, about, Recluse being a really, really powerful outsider in terms of how much it can harm the good team. But Lunatic, obviously, can be, if it's figured out, the flip side of that, where it's very, very powerful for the good team. You also have an Acrobat on this script, which, people love to joke that the Acrobat is basically a townsfolk because it's a poison detector. Obviously, they have to die, and it's not, the most useful ability, but it is a very helpful to the good team outsider ability. And then right now with the script as it is, I believe the interaction where if a sweetheart is killed by a puka, the sweetheart poisoning doesn't proc. But please correct me if I'm wrong on that. Okay, yeah.
No, that's right.
In that case, like I think you don't really have good players who are like harming the good team, which is unusual for a script, and I don't know how I feel about that.
I mean, the other side of that coin of the Fangunatic is that if your demon is a Fangu, whatever your lunatic is, whether a Fangu or not, that gives the demon an emergency escape hatch, right?
Yeah, they just start knowing where an outsider is that they can jump to if they want or need.
Right.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I do think one of the things to be careful there then is for storytellers to really make sure that if you are giving a Fangu, like a demon Fangu, a lunatic, to make sure that that lunatic Fangu has at least 2 bluffs that are not in play, because I have seen too many games where the lunatic is given their bluffs, gets immediately jumped to, and then finds themselves in a double claim and gets executed because they're in a double claim, and like that's not particularly fun or fair for that that lunatic to, because when you're giving exactly in that situation when you're giving the demon a lunatic and saying, hey, here is somebody that you can make the demon whenever you need, that can be really, really tough for that lunatic, because while the evil team might be preparing for that, that lunatic has no idea that's coming. Unless on day one they identify that they're the lunatic, and then they're like, crap, there's a Fangu on the script. So it definitely is a really tough interaction, and one that I think storytellers have to be very responsible for in their storytelling to make sure that that's going to be fun for all of the players.
I actually really like it, but I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, I agree that if you have a Fangu demon and you're going to give them a lunatic to maybe support your lunatic a little bit more as a potential demon candidate, then you might in certain other games, because again, you're neon signing to that lunatic, here's your free escape hatch. But if you screw them over by giving them all bluffs that are in play, that's going to be real sad, big sad.
I mean, there's also a third side of this coin, so I guess it's like a pyramid-shaped coin, which is that it's also just very funny if you're the lunatic, or if there's a lunatic in play and there's a Fangu on the script. The lunatic's ability is just you think you're the demon. So I would argue that you have a moral responsibility as a storyteller if the lunatic figures out that they're not actually the demon to tell them, hey, you are now the Fangu.
I mean, I agree. I think that if you have a lunatic, whoever gets jumped to, even if they already thought they were a Fangu.
No, not if they get jumped to. Just like use the
to pretend that it's
pretend they've been jumped to.
Yeah. Yep, you could do that.
Although I'm aware that there's an ongoing question, and it's an ongoing debate as to whether or not you can tell a lunatic that's been created. And I guess the same sort of thing applies here, that they're an evil demon.
I mean, the script has Fangu on it, right?
Right, but like it's a question because you don't actually ever tell the lunatic that they're an evil demon if they're in from setup. So if a lunatic comes into play, right, are you allowed to tell them they're an evil demon? Like, could you say you are the Fangu, you are evil, if they think that they're if they realize that they're the lunatic? I'm aware that that's an ongoing question. There's arguments on both sides, and we probably shouldn't get into that here.
Probably not.
Yeah, I will say for now, the one, answer that storytellers should try to go by, for those of you that may find yourself in that circumstance, is just ask yourself if it's going to be fun for your players.
For sure.
And go based off of the answer to that.
Sometimes it will be, sometimes it won't be. All right, was there anything else that happened in that second game that either of you want to particularly talk about?
Snake Charmer continues to do Snake Charmer things.
Right. I mean, there are characters that if you put them on a script, you're taking a risk, right? Like the Snake Charmer is the absolute biggest one of those. But at the same time, they can just be really fun, so you can't really complain about that, right?
Well, so the fun thing was in both games, I bluffed Snake Charmer, and I was doing a really, really good job of it too in the second game until the real Snake Charmer.
You bluffed the Philo.
Peaked. Yeah, but the Philo Snake Charmer specifically, Alejo.
Right.
Yep. And then a snake charming happened, and then Dakota was like, I don't know what they're talking about. I'm the Philo Snake Charmer. That's not possible.
Then I spent the next 5 minutes with my former demon refusing to tell anybody that I was a minion, and I'm just looking more sus as the seconds tick by.
So just from the script, what can kill the acrobat? The snake charmer can kill the acrobat, which is quite funny. Um, yeah, the snake charmer can kill the acrobat. The philo can kill the acrobat. I suppose the amnesiac could kill the acrobat. The sweetheart, the poisoner, and the puka are the characters that can kill an acrobat on the script. There's a variety of options there. So that acrobat is going to, you're not going to know. Even in this game, I feel like there were ways for that acrobat to have died that weren't just puka poison. The reasons it was so obvious was because of uh, the fact that it was a snake charming. But I think there's two ways to handle an acrobat, and they are to give other reasons why the acrobat might die, or no confirmation on why the acrobat or why the acrobat did die to their own ability, right? And this script absolutely doesn't do the former. I think, unless I'm missing something, the acrobat is the only character that can die in the night to a non-demon kill. Is that correct? Yeah, there's no pit hag.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that acrobat is going to be really well confirmed, which is a little bit questionable. But at the same time, the evil team can really use that to their ability if they want to poison one of the acrobat's neighbors to simulate a philosopher drunking someone or a puka picking someone. Like there's a lot of ways that you can use the acrobat's ability to the evil team's favor, even though on the face of it, it looks like it's going to help the good team.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this is a pretty decent script for an acrobat, despite the fact that there's not a whole lot of, death manipulation going on here. It still can create some interesting interactions.
Quickly, I do think that the snake charmer acrobat on a script where the acrobat is going to be confirmed if they're the only night death feels really, really bad, because that's not something the minions can account for in, thinking about where they're poisoning or what they're doing. And if that snake charmer comes out and is like, oh, I used to be the demon, I'm the poison snake charmer now, and the acrobat is like, I'm the second person who died in the night, like that demon is so confirmed, those minions are instantly outed. And I think one of the the balancing features of the snake charmer is that you have to be able to believe the snake charmer. You have to find the other information that adds up.
Right, because it could be a bluff.
Exactly. When that's mechanically confirmed by an acrobat death, that feels really, really bad for the evil team.
It is bluffable, though. If the poisoner finds out they're sat next to the acrobat, they can poison the acrobat's other neighbor, gain the normal benefit of the poisoning, or even their own other neighbor, gain the normal benefit of the poisoning, kill the acrobat, and then get that confirmed former demon ness, I guess. So that is a bluffable set of circumstances.
It's bluffable in a very specific circumstance when you have a very specific minion who can support the bluff. In any game where you don't have that, then it's just going to be confirmed, and I think that is worth considering.
Right, but that's the same the other way. Like it's only really relevant if the demon happens to be next to the acrobat and they get snake charmed.
That's fair.
Okay, game two. Game two was Outed. And this was a really interesting one right from setup, I thought, because Navean, you spun the wheel of characters and you landed on Leech, Widow, and Fearmonger as the evil team.
Yes, we did.
And that put you in a bit of a weird position immediately because you decided that you didn't want the lunatic, which it had given you, because the lunatic with the leech can be a little bit unfortunate at times, and you obviously wanted to stick with the leech. You didn't want the mutant because there's no Serenovus on the script. So the mutant...
Habby didn't want the mutant.
Yeah,
I did.
Habby didn't want the mutant. You collectively didn't want the mutant because there's no Serenovus on the script, so the mutant can confirm themselves, which did end up happening. You didn't want and you didn't really want the Puzzle Master, or at least I didn't want the Puzzle Master. I was pushing away from the Puzzle Master because that would give you Leech, Widow, Puzzle Master, all permanently drunking someone or poisoning someone, which is just an absolute nightmare for the good team to distinguish between those. It's kind of like having 3 drunks in play, and you know that one of them is the leech host, but it's just a crapshoot as to which one, right?
Yeah, there's definitely some difficult potentials on this script.
So in the end, you went with the goon and the mutant, the goontant. Goon, never mind. Which are the 2 outsiders that I actually really wanted to talk about happily, as well as obviously that Puzzle Master Widow Leech interaction that I just briefly touched on, because the mutant is a naked mutant. There's no Serenova's cover, so that is a good player, an outsider, able to confirm themselves as a good player with storyteller backing, of course, without like there being any alternative explanation. I find that even if the storytellers don't execute mutants, people who claim mutant seem to be weirdly trusted, even if they don't then get executed, because they're just like, oh, well, the storyteller's just not going to confirm you, but it's fine, you're already confirmed. That seems to be my experience. Obviously, that's a meta thing, and not necessarily a problem with the script. But on the other hand, as was pointed out in chat during the game, have any of you ever seen a Serenovus bluff mutant in that way more than maybe once? Because I don't think I've ever seen it.
Maybe once. It is definitely not common. I would like to see it more often.
So yeah, even in SMV where the outside account tells you what the demon is, like imagine doing that in a 10 or 7 player game, right? In a Vortox game, that is a lot. The metas being as they are for online play, you just don't see it. So the mutant is always kind of a naked mutant, even if they're not on paper. That's more of a general mutant thing than necessarily a thing with this script. But I think that is a strong counter argument to you always have to put a Serenovus on with a mutant, which this script does not have.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not of the opinion that you always have to have them both together. They do work synergistically together for reasons, because generally speaking, it does not happen very often where Serenovus does bluff mutant, but the possibility being there on the script is at least something that Evil can maybe try to go to, whereas if you don't have a Serenovus, you obviously can't even try that route at all. But I don't mind the fact that there is a mutant without a Serenovus, or at least I didn't mind it as much as my co-storyteller does.
Then we came to the other outsider that was in play, which really dominated a not insignificant part of the game. Thanks, Dakota.
Is this section of the podcast just called Dakota fucks shits up again?
The
Dakota
Dakota,
show,
if you will. You can use that at some point.
I hate it. I hate it.
That's why you should use it. But yeah, the goon. There are not many characters that select in the night to have a goon. For the evil team, it's the demon and the fearmonger, and I suppose the widow. But on a non 1 day script, widow is probably not the best use of a widow's ability. Like on a day to remember, absolutely fantastic use of the widow's ability, and I've won games of that script just by doing that. But on this script, probably not. But for the good team, you've got the sailor, the fortune teller, I suppose the philosopher, and if they really want to waste it, or if they accidentally hit the goon, the seamstress. So there's only 2 characters that can reliably. Oh, sorry, and the chambermaid. There's only 3 characters that can reliably pick players. So for that goon is probably not going to be swinging a whole lot in most games. As it happened, the fearmonger hit the goon on the first day, on the first night. So that created an unexpected chef ping. The fearmonger, which was of course our lovely Dakota here, then decided to claim goon for the entire game, trying to also selling a Fangu world by giving the goon the puzzle master as a bluff. It was a confirmed mutant as well, so it did look like a Fangu game for most of the game, up until the demon was executed, and obviously didn't die because it was a leech game. But the the goon was able to absolutely hide the existence of the fearmonger, and I don't think the good team figured that out until like the penultimate day or the last day or something like that. Um, it was about 6 o'clock in the morning by the time we got to that stage, so I might be remembering that wrong. But that is my memory of the game. I feel like that's dominated a large part of the game. There was some um, unfortunate things that happened towards the end of the game, but I mean that's just obviously absolutely nothing to do with the script. Overall, I think that goon fearmonger is a really interesting interaction, but I think it's a script that needs more things that can choose a goon. Um, how did you find it was to set up and to run, Navean?
Yeah, I remember us having a pretty fun time coming up with a setup for this. I remember it going pretty easily well. I don't think we made a whole lot of swap outs for this one. Probably the most debate was about which outsiders to put in. And, there's some discussion here to be had, certainly. And I think we had a little bit of it during the setup, but maybe not as much as we should have. But, a leech plus a widow plus a puzzle master, real hard on the good team to try to solve that out. So we didn't put puzzle master in. I think that's maybe part of why I pushed to have the mutant instead, because they've already got the leech and the widow, which means they're going to have, as long as that widow stays alive, and the widow stayed alive, they're going to have two permanently poisoned players, right? That is already difficult for the good team to sort out if they can figure out that it is a leech. A third, and having a puzzle master drunk player in just kind of feels like a little too much. So I think that those are some of the things to keep in mind during setup here, that there could be that overload of not being able to sort some things out, not having the time to sort some things out in a way that might feel a little bit bad just because they're so indistinguishable from each other. But other than that, it was a fairly smooth setup that I recall.
In terms of the minions that weren't in play, we weren't able to get the triple Dakota Goblin. Although maybe if you changed the Fearmonger out, that could have happened. You never know.
Well, it would have, because Dakota got the Fearmonger token, right?
Would have cried. I would have literally, I almost did break into tears. I would have literally, like, not even joking, broken into tears live on stream. There is a portion of this game where I am very clearly frustrated, not frustrated, that word, but just pleading and begging to be turned good. And while I was doing so, knowing I could not be turned good, I promise you, hand on a Bible on everyone I love, that was legitimate pleading and begging to whatever was the thing to turn me good. That was, I did not want to be evil that game. I'm glad we won, like, because it's a game at the end of the day, right? And you're always gonna be happy when you won. But do not misunderstand. I did not want to be evil.
There was a point in the second game of the first script where you were the goblin again, where I walked into a conversation and you were saying to somebody, like, through gritted teeth, like, I am not the goblin for a second time in a row.
Well, you could have been the Goblin for a third time in a row.
Speaking of minions, what do you guys think about the evil twin?
There are some really fun townsfolk and an outsider to go with the evil twin, like characters that make really good twins. I think the noble is a really fun twin. I think the pixie is a fun twin. I think the Lunist is a fun twin. I think the artist is a great twin. The sailor, not so much. The savant, obviously, famously a good twin, and I want to see a puzzle master twin. I think there are a lot of really fun twin options on the script. So I do like the placement of the evil twin here.
Even though I famously do not particularly like the evil twins, I do agree with you. There are some pretty interesting choices to be had. I think twin balloonists is fun.
I'm gonna out my bias here. I think this script is really good. There are tweaks to be made. I'm not saying it's a perfect script. I really, really like this script. I will publicly apologize to the creator of the script that we didn't get to do the thing your script meant to do, which is outed evil. However, I think that breaking the way the script is supposed to be played, outed evil, obviously evil twin, goblin, widow, fearmonger are all very open and outed roles. And while we did do a little bit evil twin, like it wasn't a real evil. It was a fake evil twin. I think we show that this script has a really interesting second layer underneath the premise of it. I don't know, I just thought this was a really fun game to play, personally.
I actually disagree that you didn't get some of what the script is going for, though, right? A widow ping goes out, and then we eventually execute the mutant for breaking mutant madness, and that confirms the widow ping. We have you did hide the fearmonger because you hit the goon with the fearmonger ability, which means no announcement. You did the same thing the next day and then got yourself executed to bury the fearmonger, which is a really interesting choice. And then eventually the leech gets executed and survives, and everybody knows it's a leech game. So to some degree, there was definitely some outing of evil in this game.
You also unfortunately end up claiming something that wasn't possible, claiming to be a good, evil then good goon.
Yeah.
Right? Which unfortunately didn't turn out to be possible. So you end up being outed evil, although you didn't that didn't necessarily help the good team in any real way.
And I will argue that I wasn't outed evil because yes, while technically it was not possible for me to be the good goon at that point, good was still listening to me.
For sure.
Even if in the back of their mind they were like, yeah, Dakota, there is every world possible where Dakota's just evil, they were still listening to me. And I think most outed evil, they don't get listened to, they just get to throw spanners in the work, right? A good outed evil is just making noise, whereas I was actively being listened to on the final day.
That's fair. That's right. I think my assumption in this game would have been, if I'd been playing, would have been that you were the evil goon, claiming to be a good goon. So that's still worth listening to. I mean, obviously every player is worth listening to, but your opinions would also be as not necessarily informed as Towns might be, because you might not know your evil team. So you could accidentally be building walls to help the opponent's team, right?
And I will say, I agree with Navean. It was more of a drip feeding, like a drip tube feeding of outed evil, because in a lot of it was just happenstance. Like the evil twin pair was not started by the evil player. It was started by a good player to help what they thought was a good player hide a roll ability.
Yeah, they wanted to. So the widow was bluffing balloonist, and they got into a fake twin pair with the chef because the chef was like, "How about we do this fake twin pair? That way you can survive all the nights that you need for your information." And then they just unfortunately happened to propose that to an evil player.
Which can I speak about that for 1 second? Because I think I have an unpopular opinion on that.
Go for it.
If the widow was actually the balloonist, and that play got all the balloonist pings out there and it solved the game, nobody would have been mad. Nobody would have been like, you should never bluff evil twin because it hurts good. No one would have said anything. But because it was with an evil player, a lot of people in chat and in the game itself did not like that. Did not like that play. I think that plays like that, while should not happen every single game, because 9 times out of 10 they do end up hurting good. I don't think just hand waving them away and saying they can never help good is constructive or necessarily thinking out of the box. You all know me as a player. I like to think out of the box. I like to do plays. I do like to do plays that feel good, right? And yeah, I can understand why a good player hiding an evil player by doing a fake evil twin doesn't feel good. But I just I thought that was an ingenious way to try to help someone you thought was good. Maybe that's just me.
It certainly came from a place of a really good place on that good player's part, right? They're like, oh, here's this really fun and interesting thing we can do, and then we pivot when we need to and let everybody know that, oh, actually it was fake, just so you could get your info. And it would have maybe worked out pretty really well if there was an actual balloonist in play.
It just sucks there wasn't.
I've seen it work. I've tried it. I've been an artist that decided to get into a twin claim. So that I could wait until final 5 to ask an artist question, because there was so much suspicion on me. Unfortunately, the other player was the witch, but we don't need to worry about that.
What is it that every time somebody gets into a fake twin pair, it always happens to be with an evil player?
Yeah, I know, right?
I've seen fake twins where both players are actually good once and only once.
I've seen it twice, and one time it worked quite badly, but the reason it worked badly was because good players specifically pushed on those players, complained about the fact that that was how they'd chosen to play the game, decided that because they had made that choice, that made them evil. And the thing that made it go poorly wasn't actually the choice to do it. It was all about how predominantly good aligned players reacted to that choice. It's a much larger conversation that is probably better saved for a separate podcast. But it really does come down to, it's so important to respect how other players in the game choose to play the game, as long as it's not explicitly harming anyone in the game. And claiming to be a twin with somebody to try and stay alive for longer is unless it's done in a way that is somehow harming someone, it's I think it's really unfair of other people on a good team to target those players just because they don't see that play as something that they would consider good.
I'll just state that I didn't bring it up to try to call out anyone who had the feelings either way, right? If you think it's a bad play every single time, I respect your opinion. If you think that it's a decent play when used correctly, I respect your opinion. I just, as a player, I look for those weird plays. I search for those weird plays. I live for breaking characters in a fun way. I always try to make sure it is in good faith and not harming other players, because that just is being a dick at that point. But I don't know. I just personally, because of how I play the game, I wanted to bring it up because I thought it was an interesting interaction. It sucks it didn't help the good team, but it could have, and it could have been really, really cool.
And that's the important thing to focus on. Evan has said this once before, and I see it get quoted around every once in a while, but there's no such thing as a bad play, only plays that go badly.
Agreed.
I love that.
Are there any interactions that we want to talk about on this script then? The librarian has some interesting choices. Librarian Lunatic is a really interesting bluff for the evil team, right?
The script writer, either knowingly or unknowingly, knew what they wanted to do, right? They wanted to do interesting things for the minions, make the minions focal. And I think there's a lot of small, minute, fun things the minions can do. Chef Lunatic bluff. There's a couple, not Chef Lunatic, Librarian Lunatic bluff. And I don't think it hurts good, because I think the roles, for the most part, work together well to give good a fighting chance. But there's a lot of care, whether done intentionally or not, to give the minions fun little plays they can do.
I think the librarian is an interesting one to talk about, because if I were to make suggestions about this script, it would probably be to just change the outsiders completely. Because I think that the outsiders here, I get what they're going for with these outsiders, but I think that that overall they are a little bit off the rest of the script. Like the townsfolk, the demons, and the minions, I think really put together well. So I'd be interested to see how the librarian will play with different outsiders, because otherwise it can also be a really tough bluff, because it's kind of committing an evil player to play as an outsider if there's not a drunk on the script, because it becomes a lot easier to bluff as a librarian with a drunk on the script, right? You just say, hey, one of you two is drunk, have at it. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, because there are a lot of interesting plays that can be done with it, but it's also on a script like this, where the whole point is that the evil players are likely to get outed. It's tying them together, which is kind of unfortunate.
I do agree.
Yeah, the chef is an interesting one for 2+ minion games, because you found an evil player and there's a chef 1. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their neighbors are evil. It could do. You don't know. I think that the townsfolk work really well with the evil team here, and I think that the only thing which is that I could even mention as being particularly clunky at all is that I feel like characters that want to die in the night with characters where the storyteller chooses can be really swingy. So that's Sage Little Monster combination. But there's only one combination like that, and like you get clunky combinations on BMR and SMV, not really TB, but you do get them on those two from time to time.
I do think that there's a couple of things that I would note. One is I do feel that there are some roles on this script that might benefit from something like a Recluse, but there are also some roles that wouldn't. For example, we talked about the Balloonist in one of the previous scripts. Balloonist Recluse can be kind of a feels bad, although, again, the storyteller is making certain choices there that they don't necessarily always have to make. They can choose different things instead. But Recluse Savant and Recluse Artist is often something that people think is a real rough and feels bad interaction because you don't know if your storyteller is of the philosophy that they would misregister a Recluse for those or not, or under what circumstances they would. Recluse might not necessarily feel the best with Sage. Although, to be fair, with Sage, you have to give the actual demon. You can't substitute a Recluse for that.
Yeah, I think the moral of this is that there's a lot of potential with the many of the characters on the script, but I think I agree with Alejo that the script would be very well served by really going back and revisiting each of the outsiders and thinking about why that outsider is on the script, what it's contributing to the script, and then maybe looking at just all of the, currently available outsider options and thinking about what sort of swaps that they could make in that regard, because that does seem to be the biggest, challenge to the script at this time.
Yeah, and for the record, by the way, because we kind of glossed over it, I actually completely agree with you on this case, Navean, that the Recluse is a great fit for the script.
I think it would maybe need some other tweaking of some of the other characters, but overall, I think the script would benefit from a Recluse. Yeah,
I think the only characters that I think feels bad with the Recluse are Savant and Balloonist.
Artists to some degree or other too as well.
Right, but I think that the artist can. I think there's an argument the artist can know that there's a Recluse on the script and there might be a claimed one. So there's like ways around that. There's not ways around it for the Savant or the Balloonist, right? Or in my opinion, the Oracle. Like, yes, there's a way around that, but that's not on the script. Never mind. The Savant can just be like, you sat next to the demon, but that's still good info, right? But there's ways that it can be messed with, which it's storyteller dependent, I guess. Like the Balloonist and the Savant are both really storyteller dependent with a Recluse, and player dependent with a Recluse. But I think overall, there's no way that the Recluse can break this script in such a way that the storyteller can't fix it, and make the decision that's most interesting for their players if you've got a good storyteller. So I think the Recluse would be a really good fit for the script.
To wrap this section up with a nice bow, Alejo, myself, Navean, quickly in less than 2 sentences, who won this matchup?
I think Outed is the better script and has more potential. I think that they're both good scripts, but I think there's just one or two too many things that are core to the first script that I don't love. Whereas Outed, I think, just needs to change its outsiders, and it's a really solid script.
Yep, I agree with Alejo.
Co-signed. All right, moving on to our final section of games. Question before we start: did anyone besides myself watch these games?
I watched them.
I was told what was going on in them. I was live told them
by me, right?
Yeah.
I've watched bits and pieces, but haven't seen them in full.
First one in True Colors, which was the first matchup of the off-meta section. Hello, I'm Dakota, by the way. I got this one because I played in it, and that's mainly the reason why I got given this task. We had a really interesting game where... So, the setup in this game was fun, I think. You had a... Was it a Vortox World? I think it was a Vortox World.
Yes, the first game was the Vortox Widow.
Yes, so Vortox Widow and Mezephiles. The Mezephiles never used their word. The Widow poisoned. They self-poisoned because it was a Vortox world, and they didn't feel the need to necessarily poison any information. So we had no idea there was a Widow in play. There was a really interesting play near the end where the Widow outed Snake Charmer, and we got into this like really interesting situation where all the information proved that it was a Vortox. We'll get to that in a second because there's a really good amnesiac ability in play here, but all the information proved it was a Vortox. And we were kind of down to two characters. It was either Travis or it was Andrew. There was no way that it could have been, or at least socially, that it could have been anyone else still alive. It ended up being, I think, Andrew, the actual Vortox, Chris the Widow, and Travis the Fortune Teller. That was alive. But what really made this game really fucky, in my opinion, was this script doesn't have a lot of characters that are willing to die, right? So you had on day one me again, the town crier, just want to die. I was put on the block, and then Ekin, the sailor, was put on the block in replacement of me. I got Ekin did not die due to the sailor ability. I got killed that night, and then proceeded to spend the next 2 hours claiming to anyone who would listen that I was the confirmed good player. On top of that, which gave me a lot of like really good information. On top of that, we had an amnesiac ability. We had an amnesiac ability that the wording was choose a player if it was choose a player, they are safe from any poisoning or drunkenness. I think was the wording.
So the wording was each night choose a player. They are sober and healthy, I think was the wording on it. Which, to be clear, does not technically cover the Vortox, because the Vortox is not like sober and healthy players in a Vortox game still get false info. But the way it was being run was basically you are safe from Vortox info.
Yes. So
Yeah.
So to be fair, there is an argument that maybe that the amnesiac ability was fundamentally broken, but it was a powerful role the way it was ran, because the way it was ran was basically Jamie was walking around and just piecing together all these independent.
It's Monk in a Vortox game minus the ability to save you from death.
Yeah. And it worked really well in this game specifically, because it without that information, we still would have killed Andrew. But we would have killed Andrew a lot sooner. So maybe it didn't really do much, besides maybe help the evil team a little bit. Because I remember there was a point in this game where I was dead set that because of the information, because the dreamer dreamed Marshall, who was the sage, and privately confided in me that information without telling anyone else, which led to the dreamer thinking it was a Vortox world, which it was, but for the wrong conclusion. I was dead set that it wasn't a Vortox world, and I wanted to kill Andrew because I trusted Marshall and I trusted Dolomount. However, that's when it came out that Jamie's ability was basically the monk without the saving from deaths, which would make reason for Dolomount to get good information and Andrew P to be good. Which, to be clear, he wasn't, but it was still interesting the way it interacted. I think that the fact that the Mez didn't turn anybody was a interesting play. It didn't necessarily work out for Madeline, but I don't think it was a bad play. And I think that Chris really threw some good wrenches into play with the Snake Charmer play on the second to final day. Navean, since you watched it, do you have any other interesting interactions that you felt happened in that game? To be clear, I have not watched it back. I only have my perspective of the game, having played in it.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of confusion on day one for the evil team because there was a lunatic on this script, and for whatever reason, so I guess neither of the minions maybe really took a close look at the script, and so when the demon went to them trying to confirm to them who the other minion is, the minions responded with a lot of confusion. And so Andrew, for a good portion of day one, just thought he was the lunatic, especially when he spoke with his widow and was like, well, who's the other minion? And Chris was like, oh, it's Dolomount. And I have no idea what the minions were really thinking or doing there. They really needed to look at that script and notice, like, oh, there's a lunatic on this script. Maybe we should just like reassure our demon that they're not the lunatic. So that was definitely an interesting thing that went on day one. Also of note was the widow, unfortunately, only got about half the Grim. So Evil was working off of only half Grim knowledge, and they had a self-poisoning widow, so they weren't reaping a benefit from whatever their poison might have done. Although, again, in a Vortox game, pretty much their only choices were the Sailor or the Amnesiac, if you think that the Amnesiac maybe doesn't have an info ability, which of course you cannot possibly know. So they self-poisoned and then only got about half the Grim, but Evil still managed really quite well, despite only having about half the Grim.
It felt like a coin flip that ended at the final 3.
It was a very close game, yes.
I like the script. I think I maintain I think that there's not enough characters, not that necessarily that were willing to die, but besides the pacifist and the snake charmer, like every single one of these characters just actively to help solve the game needs to stay alive. And I don't think the script was necessarily meant to do that. Like I have a script I made that is meant to do that, right? Like it's meant to be hard decisions. Whereas this one, it just seems that's kind of like a afterthought, not necessarily a purpose of the script. I could be wrong. I haven't talked to the script creator. It feels like
maybe a bit incidental.
I actually don't think that's a flaw of the script, though, necessarily. And this is definitely a personal preference thing on my end. I despise the meta that, like, townsfolk or outsiders who have already used their abilities or, like, already have gotten all the information they're going to get in the game should just be killed in the early game so that you can kill someone. I think that's not fun for the player who gets put in that situation. And like, I genuinely wish that players would be more open-minded with like what it looks like to make an execution on day one of a game. In a script like this, I think part of its power is that you have so many powerful good players that one of them might get executed on the first day. You might be on day one of the game and kill the fortune teller because you're trying to make a kill. You have to, kill because there could be a Vortox in play. And the result of that is that like a really powerful information role might be killed. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a really interesting thing to have to work with in, solving the game. And again, part of like having lots of different powerful roles is that yes, they're all going to get more information as they live and as the game goes on. But they're also, if they're not executed, they also have the chance of being killed by evil. And you're going to be able to, if the storyteller's doing a good job, you're going to be able to piece together enough of a solve with whoever continues to live in that game that I think going back to that first day, yeah, that's like part of why that Vortox is there. That's part of why it's intentionally really hard, I think, to make a kill on the first day of the script. And I don't think that's a flaw. I think that's a feature.
I agree. I like that tension between nothing here really wants to die, but you have to for a Vortox. And there's no, like, again, aside from maybe a snake charmer, possibly a pacifist, depending on how that individual player feels about it. There's nothing here that's like, yeah, make me Vortox bait. I guess maybe an artist who's used on day one. But I agree. I'm not the biggest fan of, oh, I'm a spent roll, so you can just go ahead and kill me. Like, nah.
I agree that I'm not a big fan of that meta, but I think there is ways to combat that meta. I'm not saying this is a flaw of the script, right? I personally don't necessarily like it. I just don't think I like Vortox. I hate that. What in my opinion is fake tension, right? Because the Vortox is just this boogeyman in the corner of the script that you're never going to test, even if you have information on day one, however late it is, that it's not a Vortox. You're always going to be like, well, let's just kill somebody just in case it's a Vortox. I don't think tension works for me personally when you never face that tension head on. Because trust me, If someone would hard vortex check with me, I would know because I am a very big proponent of it. Specifically because no one else wants to seem to face that tension head on, which is fine. I'm not saying you have to play the game like I do. It just Vortox always feels kind of flat with the tension because it just seems kind of forced.
I think you feel about Vortox how I feel about Legion Paranoia.
I think this is another interesting point of script design, or the base 3 script design, that is something like with all of the here's how to build a script advice that gets regularly shared. This is something that isn't as regularly shared or commented on, which is that another thing that all three of the base 3 scripts have in common is they have a reason to execute on the first day. Undertaker, Vortox, and that's the entire point of BMR. You sometimes it's not something that gets mentioned a lot of times, but as with you only really need one or two sources of outside manipulation. It's something that all three of the base 3 scripts have in common for a reason. On the topic of do we need to kill only spent characters? I've made a couple of scripts along a similar lines, which are 12 power rolls and a virgin, and it's a really fun base setup that I like to make scripts out of.
Sometimes I just do that on TB. Like you just put in all the powerful rolls in a virgin, and you're like, let's see what happens.
For sure.
I would like to find opinions from Navean about maybe the storyteller's influence in this game before we move on to the next one, because I did not get the benefit of seeing what the storyteller did or didn't do, and Navean did. So I'd like to know what Navean's opinion on the storyteller influence on this script in particular.
Yep. I mean, obviously, the storyteller's choice of Amni ability has an influence, right? The ability to have townsfolk allow the other townsfolk, because it was fairly informational heavy, to allow the other townsfolk to actually get true information. And I think it's debatable about how helpful that is in a Vortox game, right? At least a monk has the advantage of knowing that that is what they could possibly be doing in a Vortox game. Whereas if you're an amnesiac, you basically have to, you have to guess at that. And good on Jamie for having figured it out. And that helped sort of solve and unravel some of the information there. There was a point where Andrew, who was bluffing Undertaker with Vortox information, almost got noticed as evil because he was claiming to have seen Ekin as a role that wasn't Sailor on a night that, it was allegedly so the amnesiac chose Andrew on night 2. And what some people failed to remember was that on day 1, the Sailor survived their execution. So Andrew didn't start getting quote unquote Undertaker information until night 3. So he was in the clear, but there were some people who thought they had caught him out on that, which I think if that had been the case, if he had been found out as just hard confirmed evil because of an amnesiac ability before it had been solved, had happened to choose him and he'd already committed to a bluff, I think that could have felt really bad, and evil got a little bit lucky that that's not what happened. But, overall, I think the Amni ability, because it got solved, ended up being quite helpful to the good team instead of harmful. And then the other major storyteller choice was at the very end. Andrew killed the sage in the night going into the final 3, and they had to choose who to show this sage as Vortoxed info. So they chose Chris, who was the widow who in Final 5 had bluffed that he had been snake charmed, and they showed the sage themselves. So it did leave it as a 50-50 between Andrew and Travis, which was already how town was generally leaning anyway. So I don't think it ended up having the biggest influence, but certainly it has some influence because town had already solved that it was Vortox, and therefore Chris was just confirmed as not the demon. But, that's always the case when you have a Vortox who kills the sage going into a final 3. That is a difficult position for a storyteller to be in, to be like, who do I show so that I am not just immediately outing who the demon is because they've solved that it's Vortox, right? But certainly an interesting choice to show Marshall to himself.
Yeah. And Adam did mention that he hem and hawed on that decision.
He did. There was a lot of debate about it. There's one other thing that I want to make a general comment on about not just this script, but we've actually seen it in several of these scripts that we've gone over today already, which is the combination of Fangu and Mezephiles and the potential that can get you +2 evils in a game, and that is something to consider. I think that scripts can sustain two characters and no more than 2 characters that could change alignment. But even at 2, you have to have a storyteller who is paying careful attention to that setup. Most scripts, if you have alignment changers, should probably only have 1.
And I will make one last comment on this script before we move on to the next one. We can come back to it at the end of the whole roundup if we want. There has been debate. We had this debate last week. I don't think it's necessarily a debate we need to go back to, but the script does have Devil's Advocate and Leech. There are players in this community that very much despise that combo. There is, I think, points on both sides of the debate. We don't necessarily need to get into it right now, but I should mention that might be considered a detriment to this script.
And can I just obviously we've talked about some of the various interactions on the script, but I don't think we need to get into the Recluse debate for the 4th time.
Yeah, I'm going to register as the devil's advocate and disagree with you there.
So funny, Jamie.
Oh my god!
All right, moving on to the second script.
You know what? At least my laughter was genuine.
No, genuinely though, I think because we mentioned the Leech and DA, got into that a bit last week. I don't actually think it's Leech and DA that's the problem. I think Pacifist specifically is the big challenge there, because Pacifist on a script where people can be DA protected and can be Leech protected is just very, very difficult to get any benefit out of unless the storyteller is being incredibly careful about when they are choosing to proc that pacifist and how they are using it to benefit the good team. It really needs to be serving as a townsfolk.
Let's go to the second script, which was a lunatic script. This was the second lunatic game of this World Cup a week in review. And so the good setup was an amnesiac ability that basically was the noble but for alignment. You pick 3 players, you find out what the alignment of the majority of those players are. You had an empath sitting next to the other 2 good players. It was a 3 versus 7. 3, is that the math? Yes, 3 versus 7. And then Marshall was the Oracle. So to counterbalance that, Adam gave every single one of us, the legions, a different bluff. Like, there was all unique bluffs. It didn't end up mattering because we ended up killing 2 of the 3 good players on day 1 and day 3. We killed Marshall first, mainly based on me bluffing Recluse and just Cat wanting to get more info away from their neighbors, because at the time we fought with the Vortox game. We killed me on day 2 because no one was believing my Recluse bluff anymore. I wonder why that was. I have no idea. And day 3, we killed Jamie, which had me shitting bricks because we have Jamie on the block. I wasted my dead vote to kind of pile on, and then a Legion tried to get Jamie off the block. And it didn't work, so we won, but I was confuzzled as a player. And I'm glad most of the players don't look at the video cams, because I was visibly confuzzled. So that was that game, basically. It was a real quick game. There's really not much to talk about the interactions of themselves, besides the 3 good players and how powerful or not powerful they were, depending on your opinions. So I don't know. I don't think the script was given not the fairest chance. It was random, right? But I think it goes back to what we were talking about Legion in the first game, where For a lot of cases, it's just there as a threat, like how the Vortox is. If you disagree, feel free. If you have any opinion on the script, maybe and you watch the game, what was your thoughts?
Yeah, it's the same kind of issues that you always have with Legion, which are some of these roles might work real weird with Legion. But there's also a Vortox on that to help combat that. There's also a Nodashi, which can maybe cause some interesting things with, some people getting like in misinformation that points towards Legion, while some getting misinformation that points away from it, or even true information that points away from it. There's definitely some interesting play between some of those demons and the info roles that are in play. But as to the actual game that got played, an empath in a Legion game is incredibly powerful, especially when they are sat between two good players. And it is just, I think that when you're an empath on a Legion script, you really need to maybe reconsider the sort of like main goal of empath, which can sometimes for some people be about, I want to get more reads on different people, because you risk being, exactly what happened here, where you're an empath and you have good reads on the only two other good players in the game. And unfortunately, you get convinced that it's probably actually just a Vortox game, or at the very least, it's not Legion anyway, and therefore you should vote on your neighbors and find out, right? So yeah, it was a very, very quick ending, and it's just a little unfortunate sometimes when you see that happen, because you've got the grim view and you're going, oh, this is like painful, but you can't do anything to stop it. But obviously, well played on Legion's part for managing to convince Kat that it was, a Vortox game and you should kill your neighbors because you're sat next to an evil at the start.
I'm struggling to talk about the script because when I looked at it and when I looked at it afterwards, and this is my own personal preference, obviously, I'm not trying to talk down to the script maker. This just looks like a script to me. Is it a bad script? No, I don't think it's a bad script. But I don't think I would ever necessarily pick this script out of a lineup to play. Which is fine. Not every script is going to be to my taste. I'm not the purveyor of scripts. Like, you don't have to cater your script to me, some girl on the internet. But I do think that it just kind of falls flat to me personally. Maybe it's the game, but
It might have been. I think that the title of the script, Math is Hard, kind of shows that this is a script maybe focusing quite like a little bit on the mathematician and the potential interactions there. I think that mathematician is really interesting on this script. But otherwise, I do kind of agree with you that, like, yeah, if you're looking at it through the lens of math and how math interacts with certain things, I think there's some cool stuff here. But there's also some stuff that it's like, I'm not really sure why, like why is Chef and Clockmaker both on here? Is there really a benefit to having both of them?
Yes.
Um, and again, we've got a balloonist recluse situation, which in a Legion game is going to be rough. Balloonist and Vortox, not the best.
I don't think we need to have the Recluse discussion for the fifth time.
No, we don't, but it's worth bringing up that it is here as well. Everything that we talked about previously is present here with Balloonist in regards to those particular roles.
Yeah, it is definitely, I think, a really good point that anytime any of these scripts are being played and it's Legion, I think it is going to be really difficult to sort of get a holistic sense of how that script actually plays, because Legion is a very, very specific demon. Obviously, I think especially Dakota, you've brought up multiple times now how Legion can really effectively serve as a mechanic to, force players to think a certain way or to try and play in a way that they might not play if Legion weren't specifically on that script. But then to actually have Legion in play and to see how that plays out is a completely different game. So yeah, for this script, it does seem like a really interesting script. But yeah, definitely, I think maybe we can spend some time now chatting about what sort of changes we might want to see with these characters. I agree, for starters, that like Chef and Clockmaker serve very similar purposes, and perhaps rather than have both, it's better to figure out which one fits in more appropriately with the rest of the script and then replace the other with something better.
One last point on Legion before I never talk about it ever again. Legion, in my opinion, it takes up the same space that Riot does. The only difference is that Legion causes paranoia when it's not in play, and Riot, you just know it's not in play. But they're both demons, more so than any other demon, including but not limited to the Leviathan, that changes the way you play the game. Whereas with the Leviathan, it restricts the number of days and there's no night kills. It doesn't necessarily change like the way you play the game. Besides just it reframes how you play the game. Riot and Legion feels like two completely different games than the rest of Clocktower to me personally. I'll let everyone else talk about other characters that are not the Legion.
Trouble of Recluse is an interesting interaction that I've not really seen that often. That thing that people sometimes do when you go, I'll juggle that player as all four demons and the Serenovus. You get a 5.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you could use the Recluse's ability to hard confirm an outsider to the juggler, I guess, or you could just give a 1.
I will say something I do like about this script is that the outsiders are all incredibly bluffable in a Legion game, which I think is something that often gets lost on Legion scripts, because, in Legion, obviously the number of outsiders is arbitrary. And especially if you're going to have like 3, maybe 4 townsfolk, there might not be any outsiders at all. And so I think it can be really, really tough when you have a script that has outsiders that are extremely difficult to bluff, who are then, and Legion is trying to claim that to make it seem less Legion-y by being like, look, there are outsiders in play. So I do actually really like this particular subset of outsiders. Although that said, a snitch actually being in play in Legion is a very silly interaction because then the Legion would get 6 bluffs each.
Everybody gets 6 bluffs. Yay!
One thing that I will actually say about the chef and the clockmaker is that they're actually, aside from Legion and I guess Fangu, Nodashi and the Vortox do actually provide reason for them to disagree with each other quite strongly. I think the fact that this is, the first Nodashi scription, I don't think we're going to see many Nodashi scripts over the course of the competition. It's not a very popular demon. But I do think that the characters here do work quite well with it. Obviously, the mathematician does. It's going to be a little unfortunate if you've got an amnesiac being poisoned by the Nodashi, because that's just eh. But apart from that, I think that these all pretty good Nodashi. Like, there's nothing here that's broken with a Nodashi, right? Nothing that will immediately give the game away. No acting characters that should obviously act.
I mean, okay, so technically you could have the issue of a Philo who has gained, say, the Savant ability, and then if for whatever reason, I mean, this would have to be a choice that Evil makes, and I don't know why they would make it, but if the poisoner decides to poison their own demon, and then that Philo is no longer Nodashi poisoned, and then they go get their Savant info and get told that they can't. But this, again, requires a specifically Evil team to be doing something like that, and I don't know why they would. There's no reason for nobody to die in the night on this script, so it's not like they would be able to, they would be doing a bluff situation. That would just be, maybe don't do that.
Well,
also, maybe you just executed the widow.
Yeah, I'll also say this. Please get your demon's permission before you do that. But I think that if you do that, the chaos that will ensue from town, where they're just like, what? Why does that make, none of this makes sense, I think could win you the game as Evil. Now,
why did the demon sink or kill? There's no reason to do that.
Please give your demon heads up. Don't do it against your demon's will. But I think destroying the game could make you win. Just a weird thought, though.
So basically, be a team player there, but
Sure.
go for it if your
Yes.
demon's up for some weird shit.
If your evil team is myself and it's a 1 minion 1 demon team, let's do it. I'm down. I'm down for it. Open invitation. Tell me first, and we'll do it. But most players will hit me in the face for suggesting it.
Every once in a while, you have to do something that might seem counterintuitive. I don't know. The other night I played in person and I was the leech, and I realized that my minion was a psychopath who was about to kill the leech host because they didn't know that it was the leech host. And so in the night, I pointed at my psychopath and killed him. And then when we woke up in the morning, everyone was so confused because they were like, but he outed Minion and now he's dead. And there was Little Monster on the script. And I was just like, maybe it's a Little Monster game. We don't know. Very bad.
There was also the Thursday game, the Sex and Violets that Aggie ran this week, where I just decided to sync kills for no particular reason. And Tao were talking about that until the last day. So just don't kill people. It's fine. You can be a good demon. Like, you don't have to be a murderer.
Actually, yeah, in that same game, I killed Chiz knowing that he was the pit hag because I was like, people will wonder if that's a fit. Even though like the world where you were the
Yeah,
Fangu
you did.
jumping made sense with all the information, it was like, well, now people are talking about what if Chiz was the Fangu? To Art's perspective, it looked like there was a pit hag and a demon alive because why on earth would the pit hag have died after pit hagging him into the mutant? Like, yeah, it definitely can make people go a little bit into overdrive with
Yeah.
the way that they're considering solves on a game.
Is there any other final tweaks on the script that we would like to see? I mean, I think we've covered most of the interactions.
The one thing that I'm like really seeing when I look at this script is that it's really like S&V plus, or not plus. I was gonna say S&V light, but it's not that either. But it's so S&V adjacent. Like so much of this script is derived from S&V, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I think Alejo, like the other week when we ran BMR with an alchemist and a couple other adjustments, like it can often be really, really amazing and really interesting to run what in many ways is a slightly adjusted base script. But yeah, I'm curious, given that this is specifically a custom script competition, to what extent if you look at these swaps, like of the townsfolk, I think half of them come from S&V.
Navean, since you were the only other person to watch the game in full, who do you think won between True Colors and SMV's drunk little brother?
So I will say, like I said, I think that Mathematician does some really interesting things on Math is Hard, and I think that keeping that as a focal point of the script for any revisions is probably a good idea. But overall, I think I prefer True Colors a little bit more.
Dakota, what do we have coming up for World Cup games?
So we have upcoming matchups. The day of recording, the day after you've heard this, the day before you've heard this, whatever. Sunday night at 7 p.m. Eastern and midnight BST on the Pandemonium Institute, we have the rescheduled rematch of All the World is Stage versus Hide and Seek. On Monday, 6 p.m. BST, 1 p.m. EDT. On Missing Pieces BGC, we have Venom Village versus One Bad Day. On Tuesday at 8 p.m. EDT, Wednesday morning 1 a.m. BST on twitch.tv/Bogardeth, that's BOGARDETH, we have The Life and Death of Socrates versus Oddish. On Thursday, 8 p.m. BST, 3 p.m. EDT on TPI, the Pandemonium Institute, we have Advanced Don Johns and Demons versus That's a Double Claim. And rounding it up for the upcoming games that we'll be talking about next week on this podcast, Saturday, 8 p.m. BST, 3 p.m. EDT on Saints_or_sinners. We have Clean Sweep versus Howdy Neighbor. You will next see Navean on next Sunday, 6 p.m. BST, 1 p.m. EDT on Jamie B0TC for Deep Bluff 9 Redux versus Fussy Either. And that, I think, wraps up this week's edition of World Cup Weekly. Is there any more comments from my lovely co-host and our special guest co-host that maybe just get rang in to be a normal co-host? Because we love gooses in this household. Navean, do any of you have any final comments before we say adieu to our lovely listeners?
Well, let's do the usual thing. You can find where you can find all of us. You can find me and Jamie at Alejo F Black on Twitch. We are every Tuesday. Dakota, where can people find you?
You can find me on the Sunday stream on the Pandemonium Institute almost every Sunday. Also at twitter.com at /Coda Holiday. I am a pro wrestler. Watch me beat other humans up for money.
And Navean, our special guest, where can people find you? Or more accurately, where can people not find you?
I can be found on Monday nights occasionally on Bardic Stream, where I trade off co-hosting duties with Ekin. I am on the Friday Connecticut Blood on the Clocktower stream, and on Sundays on Jamie B0TC.
That has been another episode of World Cup Weekly. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you all next week.